for inviting me. Thank you for the interest for the folks here and also joining us remotely. I like this to be as interactive as possible, so please do ask your questions at the end of the presentation, and hopefully we can just help demystify this process, make this a little easier to understand. That's really the whole point of this today. Voting overseas should be a simple process, and just in keeping with the spirit of the Atwater Library, we want to be very inclusive. Most U.S. citizens over the age of 18 living abroad are eligible to vote, and we want to make that as simple as possible, keeping in mind we are in that time of year and during an election year. So the most important piece of information I can share is the website for the federal voting process, fvap.gov, FVAP. I'm going to talk more about that, but it's a central site of information and step-by-step guidance on how to register to vote and cast your ballot. There are 50 states with 50 different processes, 50 plus election offices. It can be a little hard to navigate on your own, but that's why we have the centralized website, and it just makes it a lot easier. So just to give you a little overview, a little history here, Canada has an impressive number of adult U.S. citizens who are eligible voters for the most part. If you look at the numbers, nothing even comes close. Canada has over 600,000 voters, more and more every day. We have a lot of dual citizens, especially that live in Montreal. As a reminder, the U.S. Consulate is here for all of your needs, whether that is voting assistance, passport renewal, or emergencies affecting U.S. citizens. But I just wanted to highlight this. It's not a great surprise due to our location, close ties between the US and Canada. But unfortunately, there are a lot of eligible voters that do not end up voting. And so some of the reasons are most commonly 22% of these voters had difficulty figuring out how to vote. So the process is confusing, it seems complicated, we're all very busy, people may not have time, or maybe there's technical issues in their way. Voting process is too complicated or not even sure where to start. And you can see how that breaks down by age groups, but overall, some people weren't even sure if their ballot was returned. So it's a frustrating process when you're interested, you want to be involved, but you're not really sure where to start. And Canada, as you see, there are 600,000 plus US citizens. I think this chart really breaks it down. If you just look at it, how many eligible voters we have living here. And unfortunately, the overall turnout is very low. It's under 3% in Canada. So it's sad to me to see this number, but it tells me that we can be doing a lot more to get the messaging out and to help people to get them to vote. So I see some of these dates are in the past. Don't fret about that. It's not too late, and I can explain this a little more in detail, but generally, the deadline to mail ballots to eligible voters overseas is around 45 days. So I recognize that's in late September, but again, it's not too late. So there is a way to register with your individual state, and I will also describe this in another slide. There's a way to return a centralized ballot in case you did not receive your individual ballot in time. So just some questions, because I think, again, the reason why less than 3% of eligible voters end up casting a ballot is confusion or maybe a belief that they're not eligible, they're not sure where to start. Basic answers to these questions: your voting residence, what state do I vote in, what district do I vote in? It's generally your legal residence. So everyone tuning in lives in Canada but has a tie back to the US in a state somewhere. And it's usually the address at which you last resided prior to leaving the US, assuming you lived in the US and moved to Canada. So if that's not your situation, maybe you're a US citizen by being born abroad to US citizen parents. Maybe the place you used to live in the US doesn't even exist anymore. The house was torn down. It's still possible to vote. You don't need to be a property holder. You don't need to have a fixed address in the US anymore. You don't have to have the intention of returning to the US. You can be here permanently and still be a US citizen and still be an eligible voter. And your address does not necessarily have to still be a valid residence. Some states even allow you to vote if you've never lived in the US before. Generally, you go through your parents if your parents last lived in the US in a state. You do need to have one voting residence. So you need to figure out where that is, that place where you're most closely tied to. Just kind of a map of the process is step one, are you registered to vote somewhere? Some states let you renew this year after year. Some places you do have to re-register, so you should be mindful of that. Understand what your status is and request the ballot. Step two, they will receive your request and they will send the ballot out to you. You then you fill out your ballot, you return to the election office, and that process should be a fairly simple one. Now, if there's issues along the way, and apologize for this. Okay, so I'm back here. So if there's issues along the way, I mentioned the deadline of 45 days. It's not a hard and fast deadline. Generally, around 30 days or so is when you need to act if you haven't received a ballot. For any of you tuning in, that's just a few days away. So if you have not received a ballot or confirmation from your state that you're registered, go ahead and go to that website, fvap.gov, and look up the process for getting the ballot from them. There's a centralized ballot where you don't need to go to your state. All the information is there, and you still have time for them to send that to you and get it back. Depending on the state, you can either email, fax, or send by mail. And for that last part, that's where the US Consulate can also come in to help you with that. If your state requires you to send by mail, or if that's your preference, know that you can come by the US Consulate in downtown Montreal. We're at 1134 St. Catherine Street West, downtown Montreal. And this information is on our website, but if you come by during business hours, you can drop off your ballot and we will return those to the US. We do regular runs during the week and we can securely make sure it gets into the US mail. If you use the official ballot on the FVAP website, there's generally no postage required. So hopefully that makes it easier, not having to figure out international postage or how to mail that securely. We can assist with that. So some other questions we get sometimes that I wanted to address, and then maybe if there are any further questions. So again, your address, that's the first step, is to figure out where you're registered with or where you're affiliated with. Again, if you've ever lived in the US, you've ever voted in the US, it's probably the same address. If not, go a step further, look where your parents have lived, where they've been registered, and you can usually figure out your state that way. Now, some people ask if voter registration affects my tax status. You can vote for federal office without a change to your tax status. You should know if you vote in state or local elections, that might change things and that might affiliate you with a state or with a county, and there may be tax implications to that. For federal elections, usually that does not affect anything. Again, if the house you used to live at, someone else lives there, you don't get mail there anymore, maybe the house was even torn down, that's fine, because as an overseas voter, you will identify yourself as an overseas voter, and that voting material should not be sent to that address. They understand that you'll have a local address in Canada, and you'll have a US address for election purposes. You generally do not have to select political parties unless it is a primary election. So that's sometimes a question we get as well. And again, if you do not get your ballot, if you haven't gotten it by now, I would encourage you to go ahead and you request that federal ballot, there is something to fill out called a federal postcard application. It's supposed to make it easy for everyone to just fill out a standardized form, send it in, and then they will mail you a form in time to vote in this election. Finally, sometimes we get the question, unfortunately, you cannot vote at the consulate or at the embassy in Ottawa. We don't offer voting in person, but what we do offer is just this information about how to vote, how to register, how to cast your ballot. And as I mentioned, if your ballot includes returning by US mail, you can come by the consulate during the week when we're open and we can assist with that. We will keep that in a secure lockbox and make sure it gets returned securely to the US mail. So that is the basic information I wanted to share. Some of the most common questions we've received so far, but I understand there might be situations we haven't addressed or other questions, so I welcome those now.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. That was super helpful, and a reminder to the audience that this is being recorded, and the video will soon be posted on the Atwater Library's YouTube channel. While I wait to see what questions come from the Zoom audience, I'm depending on our tech staff to alert me. I'd like to acknowledge the presence in our in-person audience of Randy Weitzner. Randy is an active volunteer with votesfromabroad.org and Democrats Abroad. Randy, would you come up and let the Zoom audience see you? And I invite you to tell people what you and your groups have to offer in the way of help with voting.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Randy Weitzner, and I do work with Democrats Abroad, but I also work with a website, called votefromabroad.org, which is basically a one-stop shop for everything that overseas absentee voters will need to get their ballots back. So I think Elizabeth gave a pretty good rendition of the general process of voting from abroad. I'm here to add a little bit of color to that in saying that it is often extraordinarily difficult to get your ballots back. 50 different states, thousands of counties, and your absentee request for a ballot goes back to the county that you lived in. And so it can be very complicated. The process does not always go off without a hitch. And so if you go to the website, votefromabroad.org, it is a nonpartisan website. Voters of any persuasion can go there. On that site, you will have the opportunity to fill out the federal postcard application form, the FPCA, which is the identity information form you send into your county so you can tell them who you are, where you are, and how you would like to vote. That piece of paper or email, because we can all email that into our counties, should be done every January. Some states will allow you to stay on the voter rolls, others will not. And if you don't know that, you could be caught short now in October, thinking I'm on the voter roll, something's coming to my house soon, maybe, but the election is a month away. So it's not a good idea to wait. We suggest that everybody fill in the FPCA in January and get that information into your county. So 45 days out from the election is what we call ballot drop day. So it's not really a deadline for us, it's a deadline for all of the counties to send out the ballots to the overseas voters. But don't wait. Waiting is really problematic for getting your ballots back. It can be complicated. There's Canada Post to contend with if you're putting it in the mail here. And then there's the lovely US Postal Service, which has not had the most stellar reputation recently for delivering mail. So you really need to get that material back as soon as possible. If you are a voter and you have not gotten a ballot by email or postal mail now as an absentee voter, you need to fill in the backup ballot, the FWAB, Federal Write-In Absentee Ballot. That is only available on the fvap.gov site. It is a step-by-step process. It is not complicated, and you can send that in right now, and it works as an official ballot. If your official ballot should come to you by email or postal mail, you can fill that out as well. You will not be accused of voting twice. Your county will, if they get both of those pieces of mail or material sent back to them, will only count one. But at this point in the calendar, if you don't have your official ballot, you must do the federal write-in absentee ballot. That's the only way you're going to get it back in time. It's great to hear that the consulate gives us the opportunity to send that back to the states through them, but keep in mind, what they're doing is they're bringing it back to a mailbox and putting it in the US Postal Service. So you still have the same problem. You can, if you like, courier your materials back. It can be costly, but it's efficient, but please do not ask for a signature because there's not enough people in a county office to sign for that material. And I'm hoping that anybody who is listening now or is going to see this recording later will help us up our numbers of getting absentee ballots back from Canada, because what happens in the US really matters to us. We share the longest land border, and US citizens have this right, and I think we should exercise it. So just one more time, votefromabroad.org. That's where you need to go.
Thank you, Randy. That was really, really effective and powerful. We have a question from the front row. Carol, would you like to come up, or I'll bring the mic to you, whatever you'd prefer. Okay.
So this question is for Elizabeth. Could you just go through the things that are required when you are filling out the ballot? Because there are certain precautions that voters have to take so that their vote is validated. Could you just kind of go through the list of things to be watchful for or mindful for as you're filling out your ballot for those who may not know?
I would just pay attention to the requirements. Different states are, so I'm not really sure what you mean by validate, but
In the instructions, you know, they ask, well, do it like this, and if you don't do it like this,
okay.
it will be, your vote will not be valid. So I guess those are the things that I think worry people is, oh, my vote won't be counted anyway, why would I bother to vote? So I'm just trying to let people know what some of the important factors are in filling out that ballot.
I ran into something similar when I registered with my state, Florida. Florida has a couple of different rules depending on if you're in the US, if you're military overseas, or you're overseas but you're not military. And so once I figured out what my status was, I have to admit it was a little confusing. Before I knew more about this process, I went through the local office and they didn't know I was overseas and that I wanted to vote. They thought maybe I was a local person there, and at first the information was a little confusing. So from personal experience, what I would just say is go to fvap.gov, go to the central authority on this, and fill out that postcard application and fill out the standard ballot that they have. When you try I thought I was doing the right thing by finding my local county, going to that office, but sometimes they don't understand that you're an overseas voter, and sometimes you might request the wrong thing, or they might give you incorrect information. No, you can't vote by email. No, you can't vote by fax. If they don't understand that you are an overseas voter, but you are a US citizen. So to eliminate any confusion on that, and that yes, you have the right to vote from overseas, I would just go to the source, go to FVAP, and follow their instructions. Now, they might ask for some information you don't have. People have asked us, I don't have a US Social Security number. I was born abroad, I never applied for one. That's not a requirement, just indicate that or leave it blank. It's okay, you can admit that you live in Canada, so there's no problem putting an overseas address, but make sure that your address for voting reasons is in the US. So I have an address through a family member, and I voted there before, so even though I don't physically live there most of the time, that's my voting address. So I would just say, yeah, when in doubt, that's why we have FVAP, that's why we have that resource online. Just fill out that application to eliminate any confusion. You don't want to fill out the wrong form that you found online through a search. And this is why we have this. It makes it a lot easier. So hopefully no one will run into any problems that way, because it can be confusing. I think, and that's the reason we have these resources is, as Randy mentioned, there's 50 different states, thousands of counties, everyone has its own rule. My hometown might not understand that I'm overseas and what I'm asking for, so just go through the website that's designated for overseas U.S. citizens.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. Any other questions? Anything from the Zoom audience? In person? Randy, come on back. Please join me here so the Zoom audience can see you.
It's not really a question, it's just an addition. In that fvap.gov has a great deal of information for military and overseas voters. But I have to say that votefromabroad.org has a very robust help desk, which is something that I'm very involved in. And so we are answering questions daily from voters who are having complications with their ballots, because there is a big difference between an overseas voter and an in-state voter. And a lot of states now have mail-in ballots for their in-state residents, but the deadlines are different and the requirements are different. So I will sometimes get a request from a voter saying, but I don't have a state license. Why do they keep asking me for my license? I don't live there anymore. And then I can respond to them and say, is there any possibility that you are asking for an in-state ballot? Because if you're in-state, that would be a legitimate question. If you're out of the country, no, you're not likely to have a license. So the combination of FVAP and votefromabroad.org are both great places to get lots of information, so there's less confusion. Not no confusion, but less.
Randy, FVAP, would you spell that slowly and carefully?
Well, it's fvap.gov and votefromabroad.org.
And before you leave, so how do you do the one-on-one help? Is it live online, or is it on the phone?
There are a couple of different ways we do it. On the votefromabroad.org site is a red chat button where people can ask their questions. It's not a live chat necessarily that's manned 24/7, but all of those questions and concerns come through to our help desk as an email. And then I will respond along with my other voter assistants. We will respond by email to gather more information and help that voter. As someone who's living in Canada and who has access to a US calling plan and is on the same time zone as many of the counties that we're sending materials back to, I do handle a lot of requests from people in Europe and Asia who are not on the same time zone and don't have a US calling plan. And so I call the counties and I explain, this voter has not received their materials. Is there a problem with their registration that needs to be solved? I can be in touch with them and tell them. And I can tell you, one of the things that I'm very gratified by is I've been calling counties for the last 2 weeks, and they're getting busier and busier, which means there are more and more voters sending their materials back. So that's a very positive thing that I've noticed.
Fantastic. So that's Randy Weitzner, who's a super active, passionate volunteer with votefromabroad.org. A huge thanks to you, Randy, and a special thank you to Elizabeth Baiocchi of the U.S. Consulate General in Montreal. This information session, hosted by the Atwater Library, will be posted on the Atwater Library YouTube channel. Easy to find. Just Google Atwater Library YouTube, or look at the Atwater Library website, atwaterlibrary.ca. Thank you all for your participation, especially Randy and Elizabeth. And come back for other Atwater Library activities. We welcome everyone, and we specialize in a whole range of English language, educational, cultural, and social activities. Thank you all. Oh, final words from Elizabeth. Please go ahead.
Sorry, something that just came to mind. I will be leaving a lot of material directly from fvap.gov. So for anyone that would be more comfortable perusing material in person, I have a pretty thick booklet and some other handouts. But the booklet does have a state-by-state guide. It also has a postcard application you can use. But for anyone that might be more comfortable looking at that in person, we will keep it here at the library. So I just wanted to offer that. And again, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Great. Thank you very much.